All right, hey guys, what's up? It's Mike with Symbiosis here, and I want to introduce you to a very special project that we're calling Operation InSoak. It's in Cuero, Texas. It's a 1,000-acre ranch, and we are trying to prevent all surface runoff from leaving this property. We want to in-soak every single drop of water that falls on the property and then have it come out through seep springs into the creeks. And so everything goes through the ground before it pops out in the creek. Our potential capture here is 432 million gallons because it's 1,000 acres and we get on average 36 inches of rain a year. We're super excited to be working out here on this piece of land that's been managed very progressively with regenerative practices by our client Jason for I think going on 10 years now since he started getting into this stuff, and he just keeps learning and trying new stuff. So he's doing rotational grazing. All the trees that you see on either side of the road, he grew those in his own nursery and planted them out here. He seeds cover crops every year, and he's hiring us to do a bunch of water cycle enhancement projects now and in an ongoing manner until we get the whole 1,000 acres to a point where it's just a giant sponge for rainwater. And then that's gonna increase the plants, and it's going to increase how fast they grow and the biodiversity, and then that's going to have a trophic cascade on everything else. But we start with the water and the soil, and then everything else responds to that.
This video is made possible by our patrons. Their support allows us to continue to share our educational resources, knowledge, and make these videos for you to enjoy. To get access to additional content from our projects, Q&A priority, and more, click the link below.
So even though this property looks great now in springtime in 2025, it has had a very long history of challenges and more standard land management practices that don't tend to yield an increase in biodiversity. They yield over time a decrease. So for, I think, nearly 100 years, this place was in mostly just set stock grazing. They would just move the cattle to just a few really large paddocks, but very little moving of the cattle, and a lot of feeding of hay had to happen here. And in some cases kind of maximizing the herd of cattle more for a commercial gain. And so before the rotational grazing and the cover crop seeding and even seeding of native grasses started to happen, this place was really down to a lot of bare sprots on the ground, not in soaking water very well, and it was just starting to get beat up by the cattle basically. So it's a really cool thing to see here now. We've got almost 100% ground cover. When the cattle leave a paddock, there's still plenty of grass for regrowth, so it's not being eaten all the way down to the nub, but it's being eaten very non-selectively because they're in a small enough area that they still need to eat everything and not just the ice cream plants. And then you see this immediate surge in regrowth. So we're down in the lowest point of this 1,000-acre ranch, and we're in the creek. And I just wanted to show you guys how over time erosion is bringing this creek bed lower and lower, and it's disconnecting this main water flow, which is also fed by neighboring properties from the floodplain. So when we get a big flood, it does rise above the banks and it spreads out into the fields significantly. But when it's only a low flow, it's so low compared to its natural floodplain that the surrounding area can't benefit as much from that water. And you can see here all of this exposed earth and these really steep walls is kind of what we want to see get turned around. We want to see the water closer to that flat point right there. But how do you do that? You don't want to just bring in a bunch of dirt and pour it in here. That's not efficient. That's not really environmentally going to give us very much benefit. So some of the ways that we're doing that are with one rock dams. It's a technique that we learned from the Quivira Coalition in New Mexico. Bill Zedike, really great erosion control expert and kind of soil building expert. And then we also want to take biomass that's growing here naturally, so brush and trees that will grow back after we cut them. And we want to start creating points where we can slow down the water and where we can get the water to naturally deposit the sediment that it's carrying, which is technically a pollutant. And so then we can start to build up these points where the water and the creek starts to fill itself in over time. Yeah, this is such a great example of how roots hold the bank here. So without these roots, all this soil would be gone. And this is a natural place where the creek kind of scours out because we're about 3 feet deeper than most of the rest of the creek bed. It also means it's a natural little pooling point and a place where sediment can get dropped. But without these roots here, this would probably just be expanded out, and the creek would continue to grow deeper and become more and more disconnected from the floodplain. All right, so this is one of the one rock dams that we built in the creek. We're gonna be adding to these during Operation InSoak. This happened years ago, and so we got some large rocks and we got some smaller rocks, and we used the large rocks to build this up, and then we placed the rocks so that the water would ramp up and over them and not create a scouring effect by water falling off the backside. And if you want to learn more about that, you can check out the Quivira Coalition. They've got a lot of great free documents to reference. But now, years later, we can see that the sediment from when it floods, and this is beautiful sandy loam, has filled up about 2 feet behind this, because this used to be about 3 feet tall, and it's going to continue to fill up until it gets all the way to the top, so you can add to these structures, but that's all perfect silty sediment right there. And then also there was nothing between these rocks. There were just open spaces, and so over time you can see the sediment is filling in those cracks, and so it's becoming a more effective barrier to water to slow it down and capture even more sediment. So with these features, you can continue to add to them after they fill themselves in. So we could make this wider and taller and just keep doing that, and everything behind it has now, the level of the creek has been raised up 2 feet. So this is just a little check dam down here in the creek, and we had some extra rock here, and so we use this 3 to 5 inch riprap or bull rock, depending on who you get it from, and we just piled it up here across the creek to slow down the water and to catch the debris. So you can see that already started to happen, and we're actually noticing an interesting thing about these is that they function both ways. So when this creek really flows, it's gonna back up water this way because the upstream is that way, but when we just get enough rain to just wet it down, some water comes down off of the main driveway in the fields, and it actually pushes material this way. So it's getting filled with debris and sediment both ways. And then as it does that, it becomes less porous and it becomes more effective and more permanent. And over time, it will actually build itself up higher. So it's like a self-repairing, self-building feature. So this feature is a Zuni bowl that was invented or coined by the Quivira Coalition, Bill Zedike. And we put these in where there's a head cut. So we've got a lot of water coming in here. It's about to drop down into the creek, and it starts to make a steep drop off, and then that water starts to scour out, and it'll dig this back, and then more will collapse. And so it continues to erode and move back into the field, and that's how you get these really deep erosion channels. So one of the best ways to stop these is you take some rock. First, we dig it a little bit to make it less steep, so we start to make it more of a nice gentle ramp, and we make it more of like a half bowl shape. And then we build up a little bit of a dam right here with rock and with a little bit of earth, and then we just armor that half bowl shape. And you can also build up a little bit of a rise right here, so when the water comes down, it's entering into sort of a bowl of rock, and that slows down the water. It drops the sediment, which then starts to fill in between the rocks, and it stops the erosion from traveling further up into the field. So we're standing in an existing ephemeral pond out here, and what that means is that this pond is not meant to hold water year-round. It's just meant to capture water and then infiltrate it into the ground. So when they built this, they didn't worry about going 12 feet or deeper, which is typically what you have to do to keep it from just evaporating off through our drought season in the summertime. And they didn't worry about lining it with clay or keying the dam wall with clay. So we're gonna do a lot more of these, and we're gonna do some earthworks that help bring water to this existing ephemeral pond because it doesn't fill up as often as it could. But I just wanted to point this out because I think a lot of people think, well, it's not worth building a pond if it's ephemeral. But you can do it for a lot less costs, and you can do it in different locations than you would be able to if it was a year-round pond or a stock tank for livestock to drink out of. And there's a lot of benefits to doing this. It becomes a biodiversity hub because plants that like to get occasionally flooded will start to grow here. It becomes a sediment trap, so water carrying sediment that normally would have carried that sediment off of your property and turned that into a water pollutant, and soil leaving your property, it's now being deposited somewhere. And one of the other benefits is you're charging up your local water table as well. So all of this water is like water in the bank for future extraction out of a well when you need to. So you're, instead of just pulling money out of the water bank account, you're now putting money/water back into that bank account. So there's two parts to Operation InSoak. One of them is on this big open area where we've got improved pasture. Originally it was row crops, and they did put in terraces, the CCC, back in like the 1950s or so. and then they transitioned from row crops to pasture. And at that point, they tried to get nothing but coastal Bermuda to grow out here, and they were pretty successful. Right now, because the Bermuda is just breaking dormancy, you don't see it so much, but by the summertime, you can have knee-high Bermuda grass out here. As you guys probably know if you watch our channel, Bermuda grass is not my favorite grass, but a lot of farmers like to grow it and have preferred pasture or improved pasture because that gives you a consistent hay product, and that's often what they're after. Also, Bermuda grass is just, it can handle the heat and it doesn't need a lot of water. So I see why people do it. But we're trying to get more biodiversity growing out here. So instead of just having one kind of grass, we want to see a bunch of native grasses. We're also not trying to eradicate the Bermuda, but we want to grow more than just that. And it's very difficult because the Bermuda is so competitive and it's so fast to grow, and it spreads by rhizome and seed, and it can just outcompete other stuff. But you can see here, these lines are no-till seed drill lines. And so there's been cover crops, mostly cover crops that can compete with the Bermuda grass planted here, and then those cover crops improve the soil and they break up just this monocrop feature out here, and then that allows the seed bank of native grasses and seeds that are dropped by birds and brought in from even just the wind to start to express themselves. So we can go from a monocrop to biodiversity with really just the action of seeding cover crops with a no-till seed drill at the right time, which is usually the spring and the fall. So one of the things that can happen when you have only just a couple of trees out in a big wide open pasture like this is, the cows are going to come here for shade. And because they're going to hang out here so much and they're going to have manure hitting the ground and they're going to be urinating here, it can actually become too much nutrients for the trees. And if you don't spread out some shade for them or have a mobile shade structure, they can actually kill the trees and then they don't have any shade. Instead of only relying on trees, a lot of times the strategy is you create a mobile shade structure, and they sell these, or a lot of farmers just make them themselves, and you move that shade structure around to help so that you can spread this impact out. Because in small doses, it's a great impact, it's extra nutrients for your pasture, but in high doses, it'll actually create a place where nothing can grow. And so you do that, and then you can also start getting more trees established, so that you can just do it with something natural instead of a built thing that you have to move around with your tractor. All right, so this is a conservation terrace, and you see these all over Texas driving around. They were put in by the CCC back in the Depression era, and they were to stop erosion, mostly on row cropping fields. A lot more of Texas was in row crop at the time, but also on some ranches as well. These are different from the berms and swales that Symbiosis installs because they didn't put these exactly on contour to retain water with strategically placed spillways. They usually drain downhill. So they take the water and they drain it in a direction, sometimes towards a pond, but often just to the next creek or the next gully. And so what we're doing with these in Operation InSoak is we're actually going to come along and we're going to create little check dams in the swale, or the part that carries the water carrying ditch, to create ponds along this conservation terrace, so that water, instead of just draining off, is going to have a chance to settle and insoak every 20-30 feet or so. And these are really quick and easy to do. We can just do them with a skid steer. They really only take 5 or 10 minutes per structure. So it's one of the best things you can do if you have existing conservation terraces on the land that you're stewarding.
This is Operation InSoak, and in this episode, we're walking through the design plan we developed to help this 1,000-acre ranch near Cuero, Texas, capture as much rainwater as possible. The property has significant topography, ridges and valleys that naturally funnel rain into a main creek, which then quickly exits the land. As you can see here, water funnels from the north and south side of the property down into the main creek. We used high-resolution LiDAR to study the terrain and find the best spots to slow, spread, and sink rainfall using a mix of simple, low-tech interventions. And here is what we're implementing. Brush berms to interrupt sheet flow on slopes, one-rock dams and Zuni bowls and eroded channels to slow and hold water. In a few areas, we're experimenting with berms that redirect flow from the main creek to fill ephemeral ponds before returning water back downstream. This is phase 1, a pilot to test each approach, gather real-world data, and give the landowner a chance to see the options in action before scaling up to the full design.
Okay, so this is where we're using a nature-based solution, ephemeral ponds here at Operation Insoak to try to catch some of that 432 million gallons a year. That's our potential capture. Sam did a lot of the design work. Tell us a little bit about that process of how we chose where to put these.
Yeah, so it was a really interesting thing to learn about how water moves. You know, there's a lot of nuance to it. Water follows the easiest path to travel. And so, you know, in the process of learning about this project, you know, we looked at the greater waterways of Austin and of, you know, Lady Bird Lake and the Colorado River, and how that water system is controlled and moved, and we then took those ideas that they employed there and scaled it way down and brought it out here to this 1,000-acre property, where here we're building a dam that is going to back up water pretty far back on this property. And you know, the idea is we look at the LiDAR topography of the land, and we determine where the water is going to back up the most with the least amount of work. And then we bring our machines out here. We start scraping back all the topsoil. While they're scraping back all the topsoil, which contains the seed bank, and all of the, you know, most readily available nutrients, the goody goods lie at the top. We're moving that to the side so we can retop the dam after we're done. But we take this laser level and we go out and we check to see what makes this surface level, what depth does it need to be to make it a smooth dam wall, because we want to have at least 2 feet of freeboard for this dam. And if you don't know, freeboard is the amount of space between the height of the dam wall and the spillway, so it's never going to get wet in an ideal situation.
One of the biggest mistakes I've seen people do is they'll build a pond without a spillway. And so then that means that water creates its own spillway because it finds the lowest point on your dam, starts to overflow it, and it starts to erode your dam, and then you lose your whole pond. So we chose the spillway to come off of this existing drainage way and then to fall back down into it gently away from the dam wall, so we don't get side cutting and erosion that's going to make the dam wall go away. We did have to clear some trees, but we're going to use that brush and that organic matter to help armor the backside of the dam wall and the spillway, and we're also going to build beaver dam analogs out of that, and we'll show you some more of that specifically a little further down the drainage. You guys can see we're using the excavator and the skid steer as a team, and the reason that we do that is because the excavator is really good at loosening the material, and then the skid steer is much better at picking it up and carrying it. So that's what we do. And it really speeds up the whole process, and you can move a lot of earth this way, but you can also have a lot of precision with the smaller machines as opposed to using a bulldozer or a really big excavator. So that's what we're doing here, and we've built, I want to say, almost 100 ephemeral ponds this way, so it works really well. So this is a hackberry tree here. People love to hate this tree. I've heard it called a trash tree, a junk tree, a garbage tree, a widowmaker, all sorts of negative statements about the hackberry. I've never had a problem with them. Songbirds love them. I ate the berries earlier this season and they were delicious. They tasted like maple syrup in a way. There's not a lot of meat in there, but anyway, one of the best trees for songbirds, one of the fastest growing trees. The reason people don't like it is because it only lives for like 50 to 100 years and it grows so fast and it does drop limbs in windstorms and things like that. And because the birds like to sit on your roof or on your fence, that's where they grow, that's where they drop their limbs, and so they can cause damage to stuff. But that's no reason to hate the whole tree.
So down here, we're in kind of a gully. You can see that the water really kind of rushes down through this area. And we see a lot of these mesquite trees, hackberries, cedar elms, persimmon, Texas persimmon growing alongside of it. But with this hackberry in particular, you know, you look at its root structure and you can see just how much soil it is holding up. Like, if I get all the way down to the bottom here, you can see that the soil is almost to my eye line, and these roots are just bolstering it up and holding it back. So, you know, while these trees might not be the most productive tree and they aren't going to give you a bunch of, you know, juicy fruits, they still have a really beautiful purpose when it comes to erosion control as well. We're down here in one of them gullies where the water really picks up speed around this corner and starts really gouging the earth and taking the topsoil and moving it all away and creating these big ruts. So our goal here is to take these trees that are fast growing and in abundance in this area, like for example this hackberry, and we're going to cut a little chunk of it out and do a hinge cut where we still leave the cambium or the living tissue of the tree, the vascular tissue, attached to the main part of the crown, but we lay it down into the gully so it catches all the soil that could be washing away and effectively creates a beaver dam analog. So we're kind of doing some biomimicry with this. And what's really cool about this area in particular is if you look over here, you see that nature's kind of already done it for us. We have this tree that's fallen over. It already has experienced rot and erosion over time. And you can see it's created its own little berm and it's building up soil right here. So by cutting down a tree that's its neighbor and adding to the amount of biology that can stop the soil from flowing down, we're going to be bolstering what nature has already started. So very efficient and working with nature and what has already been established. So here we have a mesquite tree, and beautiful thing about mesquites is they grow fast in Texas. They're one of these trees that moves in as an advantageous species where there's open ground. So here there has been a lot of open ground because of the cattle industry that has existed on this land for quite some time. So we're going to go ahead and do some harvesting of the mesquite. But as you can see right here, the mesquite has this little bottom whip growing out of the base of the tree. So what we are going to do is not remove the tree completely and take it out, because this provides shade, it provides food. The mesquite pods are edible for a lot of animals, and they provide a lot of shade during the extremely hot Texas summers, as y'all know. So we're gonna cut them about 2 to 3 feet away from the trunk and the base of the tree, so we can harvest the top part of it and use that as our beaver dam analog building material.
Get a nice kick.
Yeah, there you go, there you go, there you go, there you go. Beautiful. That was perfect.
Okay, so this is a hinge cut. We're mimicking just a tree falling down of natural causes. Of course, we're intervening here with a chainsaw, but the cambium layer is still intact, so this tree can actually stay alive and stay connected to its roots. It can keep growing to some extent. These trees also have a tendency to just come right back, especially the mesquite trees. So the idea here is that this is also a little bit like pollarding or coppicing, and that we can inspire new growth from the roots or from the base of the tree. And then we can also harvest that material and continue adding it to these beaver biomimicry brush dams that we're creating here. This one's pretty loose. It's not a packed tight dam like we're gonna do in some cases, because we're doing a lot of different methods to see what works best through experimentation. But as branches and leaves and other forms of sediment are coming down here, all of this roughage and all of this material is gonna slow it down, and so that will start to create just a natural process of smaller, finer materials building up here. So we're cutting down these mesquites here, and I don't love cutting down trees, but there's so many of them out here in South Texas, 1,000-acre ranch. And the thing is, they're actually gonna sprout right back from the roots. Even if you try to dig the roots out, a lot of times they'll come back from the roots. So what we're doing is, when we prune these and we put the biomass down in the drainage way and we add it to our beaver biomimicry dams, we're helping to create a stimulation in the soil, because as you prune the top of the tree, it's going to release some of its root mass underground, and that's going to decompose, and then it's going to grow more, photosynthesize, condense carbon and organic matter from the sun and from the air through photosynthesis, and it's actually going to do that in a very fast way, so we can come back in 5 years and we can harvest more of this material and continue to build up these waterways and bring them back up into connection with the floodplain around them. And then all of that water can go through the ground instead of over the surface of the ground, and it can pop out in springs and increase the flow and the consistency of the creek.
I am walking on a cowway that we built on top of this berm. So oftentimes erosion starts because in this land, cows want to get to the water or get to the sweetest grass or the most juicy growth, and that often means down into the gullies. And as they are stepping down these steep hillsides, they'll oftentimes create little pockets in the mud. And when those pockets get a heavy flow of water running over them, they end up eroding, and then you have an even bigger gully that can form right there. So instead of allowing that to happen on this berm that we constructed, we put these rocks to hold the soil in place, but also give the cows something to walk on. And then we put this brush on either side as a deterrent for them wanting to go down this way into our creek area. This bowl is designed to catch water, and so they have multiple access points, and now a nice way to cross over the dam.
This is a bridge we put in probably 30 plus 40 years ago. We had an old wooden bridge that lasted for a long time that you could see air in the post. They were so rotten, it was barely holding up. We put 2 by 12 or 4 by 12 planks across it to kind of hold it up, but it got really scary. So we decided we need a new bridge. We got this 30, 40 years ago. This is an 18-wheeler train car. And we shored it up, putting I-beams in the ground, concreted them in, concrete ends of each bridge for their approach, put dirt around it, but after many floods, we started losing a little erosion, losing the dirt around all our concrete beams. So we come in here and put in 30 tons of rock, I don't know how many rocks, to shore it all up and to stop the erosion. So hopefully it'll work. We get a flood through here every 3 to 5 years. It'll be over this bridge 3 or 4 feet. So it takes a lot of water, takes on a lot of water.
So this is one of the simplest ways to prevent erosion. You just put down rock, and the bigger the rock, the more it's going to resist movement when the water hits it. So we've actually got some larger rocks under here. We did this in 2 phases. So years ago we came in and we did some work here and we put in a layer of bigger rocks, and then we got these smaller 3 to 5 inch rocks and we filled in between those and we put a whole layer around it. And you know, these are going to move, they're going to settle, sediment is going to get pushed into them, and over time it's going to kind of knit it together as well as the plants growing. You can see there was poison ivy all up under here and it's already starting to grow back, but those are actually going to help hold this together. So the poison ivy has some function there, even though it's not fun to try to get under there. But yeah, we hope that this will make this bridge last indefinitely once all the sediment fills in between the rocks, and that this thing can continue to serve as a way to cross this creek here for as long as it lasts, as long as the metal lasts anyway.
This is Dehanus brick, which you can't see there, which in Dehanus, Texas, I think, is where they used to make brick. And we tore down a warehouse in Cuero, Texas, and built a house, a barn, sidewalks, and all kinds of stuff. And this was all the leftover scrap that's been sitting around for 20 years in a dirt pile. So we have taken most of the broken brick that we can't utilize and threw it down here to make a little multi-rock dam.
So this is the
multi-brick dam, not a one-rock dam, but a multi.
This is the very last of it, huh? So you guys have reused it that many times.
Yeah, there's still some more.
When you knocked down the warehouse, was that with machines, or did someone like disassemble that by hand?
I wasn't there, so I can't tell you how they did it, but we had to hand clean every one of these bricks. Oh, somebody had to hand clean every one of these bricks to build a house out of it. My dad built a house. We have the barn up here that we built, and so.
Well, I like that you're reusing the materials and that it's like a historic material too. I mean, y'all are really rooted out here in this area, and it is cool to have all these different stories and kind of the generational handoff. But I'm happy to be using these bricks and the soil and everything that we got scooped up with them to build these in-soak features. Like you were saying, it's like a one rock dam, which we've built out here with different sizes of rocks, so we're experimenting, seeing what works better. Usually they don't have so much soil in them when we first put them in, but I think that'll actually make it hold water better. It doesn't have to fill with sediment.
Right.
But we'll see how big of the flood we get and whether that pushes some of that dirt down, or whether it moves a little bit or not. But I think as soon as we get a big rain in here, I mean, there's going to be 2 foot of water backing up many hundreds of feet, I would imagine.
Yep.
Just held by this one little thing, which was, I don't know, 3, 4, maybe 5 dump trailer loads of this material. So it was really only a couple hours of work with a skid steer and a dump trailer.
Yep.
And here we go.
And at the end of the property, I did another one, and it has worked. It's termed converted a 1.5 foot wide stream of water to a 6 foot wide stream of water, backed up. And yes, it's within the legal limits.
Yeah, checked, huh? Yeah, there's a pretty large limit for Texas. I know it's like a couple acre feet of water before you have to get in touch with the Army Corps of Engineers.
Right.
But I think the theme of this project is looking for the pinch points where a lot of water moves through, channelized, and how do we slow that down and soak it in. And I think another theme of the project that I'm noticing is not being afraid to have it look messy, at least at first, because a lot of the stuff we're doing here, it doesn't look picture perfect. It's not something you're going to see on the cover of a magazine, but it's got a function.
Right.
And it's going to create beauty by creating more water availability, which is going to help plants grow, which is going to help everything else, right?
Right. Yeah, and end of the summer, all this stuff's going to migrate this way. There'll be all kinds of foliage growing up in there, and that's just creating more of a slowing the water currents down, catching debris and sediment and building it up and making it stronger, and keep the sediment from going downstream and letting the water soak into our property.
Seems like water is the biggest limiting factor here. Like when it's raining, when there's water, everything's growing and it's beautiful and it's nice. When we dry up, nothing grows. So if we can just create that more consistent water availability, it really helps everything else in the ecosystem to do better.
When I was a kid, this was all water all the time. It was 2 foot of water. I fished right here off the bridge, or off the old bridge, and droughts and springs drying up, and over the years, it's been dry for 30 plus years, 40 years probably. So it's one of the things I'm trying to do is rehydrate all the springs so I can get my creek flowing again. So it's beautiful to come down here and just sit on the edge of the bridge with a cane pole and catch little perch as a kid.
How cool if your grandkids or their grandkids or some future generation could do that again.
Right.
I'm curious, what do you think? I know you've done a lot of experimentation out here. You've done all sorts of cool stuff as far as like learning how to steward this land in a way that will bring the water back. If you had to tell your neighbors and the other people that are stewarding this watershed with you what you've learned, what would be one thing that they could do to help bring the springs back?
Rotational grazing, letting the grass grow. On your trip down here, driving all over, seeing all the ranches on the side of the road, probably 80% of them that you look at, just notice that if they have cattle on them, it's been overgrazed. You'll see the ground looks like this, and it's springtime. People just overgraze. Water hits the ground, it runs off, doesn't recharge the springs. So number one thing is let my grass grow via rotational grazing, let it grow tall, get deep roots, so when it does rain, I'm soaking it all in. That's the fastest way. I mean, building ponds and dams and so forth is also part of it, but that's a small, very small feature. I mean, every inch that you're soaking in on an acre is 27,000 gallons. Well, you got 1,000 acres, there's 27 million gallons, right? whatever that, yeah, I think that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
27 million gallons. So.
And then you multiply that by 36 inches of rain per year on an average year anyway, and that's a lot of water.
Right.
Yeah, I think about it as like the dams and the ponds and all these things and the brush dams, those are almost like second line, third line of defense.
Right.
The first line of defense is the soil is right where the rain hits the ground.
Right.
And if we can get it to soak in right there, then that's the best. But then, you know, in a really heavy rain event, some of it's going to flow off, and then that's when we go to these second, third lines of defense.
Right.
Or if it's popping out of a spring, you know, if we get enough of it to soak into the ground where it hits, then it'll pop out of springs, and then we'll slow it down here again.
Right, right. Yeah, so like I said, it floods every 3 to 5 years. Hopefully every 1 to 3, 4 inch rain we're soaking in, but when that big major flood comes and all my neighbors' water's coming down here, I want to do whatever I can to catch all of it and recharge this area, keep it from going downstream and rehydrating my land. Hopefully they would do the same upstream, and that would minimize all the flooding down here. I mean, if you get a 10-inch rain, this water's over this bridge in a matter of a couple hours.
Yeah, I
It goes up fast.
I remember seeing pictures of that. Well, maybe we'll cut some in so the other people can see it too, but it's amazing how full this gets.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was
exactly what I wanted to do.
That was a good adaptation to put the brush in the in-soak features as well. We weren't thinking of that at the first of the project till you brought it up and said, you know, cattle are going to get in there and they're going to make it into a mud pit anywhere that we create water, so we got to put some brush in it. So I think that's a good detail, and it seems like, you know, this is going to be something that comes up on anyone's land. Wherever you've got a little road that crosses the creek, if you raise it up, you're going to have a natural feature. And so you might as well turn it into something that is going to benefit your land instead of be a problem.
Right.
All right, so we're up on higher ground here on the in-soak project with Jason. So we've gone out of the main creek and we've gone up much higher on the property, and we've started working down this secondary creek that leads into that main creek, and we've started to interrupt the flow of water. In this particular location, there was already an interruption because there's a road that crosses this secondary creek, so there was already some water backing up there, but it was starting to erode right here, and so we armored that with rock. And there were a bunch of trees here that you know, there's plenty of trees, and so we started to harvest those trees and lay them down into the creek to help slow down the water and catch the organic matter. And we put in a line of T-posts right there to reinforce it so that when there is a big flood, it doesn't just pick this material up and float it downstream. So right here, you know, it's very subtle, and this is an ephemeral water feature, so really it's great for amphibians. We're not going to have fish in here or anything like that, but it just backs up, you know, maybe a foot and a half of water. Could back it up 50 or 100 feet, it's hard to say, but for just a little bit of work here, we're backing up a lot of water, and then that really creates an ecological niche. And you know, the cattle can still come get a drink, other things, deer, whatever else can come get a drink, but the brush that we laid in it helps to keep them from actually climbing down in there and just creating a mud pit.
Yeah, well, most people don't want any of the mesquite or weesach, and which we really don't like them either, but they are a resource here now. So they're a resource of shade once we prune them up. They're a resource of organic material to put down here in the areas to keep from washing away. It's a resource to put in bare ground anywhere else on the property that you need it to recover to keep the cows off of it. And it's a unlimited resource. It just, you trim it, it will come back full force and give you more. Just be a non-stop provider of resources. So instead of trying to fight every bit of it, is we're utilizing some of it. Yeah. The hackberries, I don't know how other people feel about hackberries. I'll probably offend somebody on the camera here, but I hate them because they grow up in the fence lines. Birds eat the berries, and it's great for birds, but they grow everywhere, and they're kind of like the mesquite. They grow up all over the place. So I have a bountiful supply of them, and so we've trimmed them up and cut them down, and they'll come back. We'll have plenty more.
Great for birds, bad for fences.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And they get big, they become a weak tree, then they start cracking and falling over and breaking in half. And as a tree lover, I hate to say it, but I hate them.
They're one of those pioneer species that comes in and helps lay the groundwork for your pecans and oaks and stuff like that. So it's good in the ecological succession process that they grow up and then they die quickly and fall down and they start to create that organic matter forest floor to make way for those more long-lived trees. But yeah, you do have a lot of them out here, and it's funny because on one project that we're working with you, we're planting trees, and then we come out here and we're cutting trees down, but we're doing it in a very intentional way, and we're pruning trees up, but it's like polar opposites. You know, we're doing everything in our power to get as many trees growing as possible with maximum biodiversity, and then we're out here with chainsaws and heavy equipment doing, you know, something very different. Yeah, I wanted to double tap on, you were saying people think it looks messy when you put brush out on the ground. And I encounter that a lot too with so many of our clients, and especially if you've got a smaller property and your neighbors are looking right at you, you know, you don't want to be the messy one, right? But when we look at how forests build soil and how they go from being young, immature forests with a bunch of pokey, thorny, undesirable trees that, you know, the ranchers and folks out here really don't like, to being beautiful, long-lived trees, it's through that process of dropping branches on the ground and creating that forest floor litter of woody material and leaves. So we're really just speeding that process up here. Right. At some point, do you ever come in and then clean that up, or does it just decompose and you know, work its way back into the ground?
Haven't gotten that far yet, but you know, if we get an abundance of forage out here, we might burn. We used to do that pretty frequently, but I've cut that way back. But we might, you know, 5 or 6 years, and we have lots of rain, then more than we can chew down, then we'll burn it. Otherwise, go over it with a shredder one day. But I'm fine with it. The cows kind of spread it apart, and they can still get in the tops of the grass, and they keep the grass tall, so it just keeps growing back rapidly because they can't chew it down very far. So I don't know what I'll do with it. So here's a great example. I mean, you just took a video a while ago of people are going to say that is ugly. Here's the ditch. Well, that's there's going to be grass growing in there because there's no cows walking through it. It's going to be catching sediment. It's going to slow water down. It's going to stop our erosion because of the grass growing on the banks and the cows not tromping it down. So eventually that's going to decompose and go on down to the next dam. So beauty's in the eye of the beholder, I think. Is fabulous.
Yeah, we're making a temporary trade-off of what is sort of a mess, if you want to look at it that way, or maybe appears disorganized to someone who doesn't understand the intention, in order for a future result. Oh yeah, we got some water in this one.
Looky there.
Now I'm being like
hey,
one
the
of the
brush
cattle.
is to keep the animals out of there.
All right, so this is one of our bigger in-soak features that we built here. We've got an earthen dam back there. We scooped out the material from within the creek. We built that up. We armored it with rocks so that when it overflows, it's not gonna erode and lose that. And then we put this brush in here to keep the cattle out of it and to help it regrow. We also seeded this whole area with dam wall recovery mix from Native American Seed Company. And you can see we got a little over an inch of rain out here, maybe an inch and a half, according to the neighbor. And we've already got water standing in here. I'm gonna guess that it's about 8 inches deep over there. And so you could just imagine if we actually got a real big rain event that made the creek flow, this thing would be probably full to about 4 or 5 feet deep. And it would back it up the creek until we reach the same level as the spillway there. So we could be backing up, you know, potentially thousands or hundreds of thousands of gallons of water for what was basically a day's work with a skid steer and an excavator, some rock, and some chainsaw work. All right, so here is a little in-soak feature. This is one of the smallest ones, and you can see we didn't get brush all up in it like we did on the other ones, and the cattle have been having a heyday in here. It actually smells different. It smells more like cattle and manure and urine, and you can just see that they're gonna make a mess. This is never gonna revegetate. You know, it's probably attracting more wild hogs as well, this kind of turned up earth smell. So I think this is just a really good example of how important it is to make that brush armoring on these features and even, you know, make a little bit of a mess, because it's actually going to prevent the long-term mess if you make the mess with the brush, and then you're gonna get those native grasses growing up through it, and that brush will actually kind of slowly disappear and sink down into the earth.
We are 30 yards away from the one that's all tore up. Same cattle can access this, and there's a few tracks right through there. This has been left clean.
I remember at the time that I was dragging this brush over from 20 feet over that way that, you know, it was a bit of a chore. I was doing it by hand because the machines were busy building another feature down the creek, and man, I'm glad I did it. It was absolutely worth the extra work to just keep this thing from getting all torn up. We just do our land management based on aesthetics, then we're not going to do any of the ugly things that help, and we're going to promote the pretty things that have negative outcomes. So that's one of the lessons that I'm learning over time, is like, you cannot let aesthetics alone drive the conversation of what we do for land management.
Right. Yeah, and the land aesthetics is where, as you'll see driving down the highway, where people want their property mowed and pretty, and trees pruned, and they don't want tall grass and weeds and diversity out there. They want a golf course. And as our land gets more segmented up into, goes from 1,000 to 2 500s to a bunch of 40 acres to a bunch of 10 acres, then everybody mows those 10 acres, and we're losing all our in-soak, we're losing all our diversity, we're losing all our wildlife habitat. But it's not going to stop. The segmentation or fragmentation is not going to stop. So you have to try to convince people that this is a different kind of beauty. They don't need they need the deep rough,
Yeah.
not the putting green.
Yeah, we're on a campaign to make tall grass, native grass cool again, and not just the turf lawns that are cut low and completely monocultured out. So I'm right there with you.
Weather patterns are changing, and you can argue that all you want, but deep grass, trees, holds moisture in, attracts rain, recovers more quickly for the cattle to regenerate. Means cools the temperature down. The temperature of the soil is going to be a lot cooler. You can walk through the pasture here versus walking across a pavement or somebody's pasture that's light pavement. The soil gets up to 140 degrees. Well, this soil is never going to get up to 140 degrees. Maybe in spots like this, you know, these bare spots, but in that grass, in the middle of summer, it's going to be 90 degrees or less, and hopefully 85 degrees, you know, depending on how good your soil is. And it's going to be sitting there retaining that moisture. So you're not losing all your grass.
So we're on one side of your family ranch where there's a lot more trees and there's a lot more tall native grasses and biodiversity. And then there's another side across the road where it's mostly just Bermuda grass right now. I know you've been working on that for a long time, but you were saying earlier that you've actually noticed for your whole life a difference in how much rainfall you get on those two sides?
Yes.
That seems incredible.
And it happens every time. We have 6 different rain gauges, all the exact same brands, you know, and the wide open. And we measure the rain all over the ranch, and we'll probably get more of them just to see even further where we're getting more rain. But consistently, every time, this will get 10 to 20% more rain than across the road. It's been happening since I was a little kid. My grandfather said the same thing. Across the road gets less rain. And I've never tracked it until the last couple of years. You know, just thinking, you know, not really, you know, just, but it's every time. Every rain, we get more rain over here. And that's, we're not talking about 10 miles across, we're talking a 1 mile from one end to the other. That's not very far.
Yeah, it seems like there's a critical mass when you get up into, let's say 500 acres or somewhere thereabouts, you know, a couple hundred acres, you can actually start to create that transpiration effect where when there's potential precipitation above you, because you've got transpiration coming up from all the plants beneath, it helps that cloud to want to release the rainfall or release more of the rainfall. I've also heard that transpiration effect called flying rivers recently, like the moisture flying up from the ground to intercept the clouds and create rainfall, called flying rivers.
Right.
So if we could see that, I think that might change how we manage land as well. If we could actually see the transpiration, that would be pretty cool.
Right. Yeah, there's all kind of videos on that, how the grass and the trees all create the biotic pump that's going to pull all the rain to you.
Yeah.
So for everybody that's complaining I don't get any rain, well, if your pasture looks like that, well, because you're not creating a biotic pump.
And that concludes the first phase of Project InSoak. We hope you enjoyed this series and learned as much as we did in the process of making it. As this project progresses, we will make update videos to show the progress and impact that this work is making over time. Thanks once again to our patrons, as well as all of our subscribers, for allowing us to document and show the work we do.
All right, hey, thanks guys. Appreciate you watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you want to learn more about what we do, how we do it, why we do it, you can hop over to our website. There's tons of good articles. You can join our newsletter. You can follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. We'd love to see you there and answer your questions. Thanks again. Enjoy.